reviewed an idea which emerges from Psukim in this week's Parsha, but which is a Yesod Gadol and has relevance to many aspects of the Torah, as you will see. There is a thought which is presented both by the Tzlach as well as the Tzror Hamor, that they say that we know that before Moshe broke the Luchos, the Oisiyos were Parchos Ba'avir. So the Mefarshim, the Tzlach, suggests that perhaps it is those Oisiyos, those very Oisiyos that were Parchos Ba'avir, were almost caught by the Rebbeinu Shalom, and those were the ones which were put back on the Luchos Shniyos. The Tzror Hamor writes, that's what the pasuk means. V'kasavti al haluchos es hadvarim asher hayu al haluchos arishonim asher shibarta. It doesn't just mean the content which was on the first luchos rishonos, but Moshe Rabbeinu is saying v'kasavti al luchos es hadvarim asher hayu al haluchos arishonim. The actual dvarim that were on the luchos rishonim, the oisios that were parchos ba'avir, Moshe Rabbeinu somehow was able to put them on the luchos shniyos. That's why it doesn't say kidvarim, it says v'chasavti al haluchos es hadvarim, the very words that were on the luchos rishonos. But what this would assume would seem to be against a thought which we've expressed in the past, which is a very, very important idea expressed by Rabbi Gutmacher. Rabbi Gutmacher's idea is brought in the Sefer Kamotzei Shalom Rav, and it answers many, many questions which should really bother all of us. He's bothered by the different phrase in this week's Parsha, where the Torah tells us, Vayifem vayirin Moshe min hahar, Shnei luchos ha'edes biyadai, V'haluchos ma'isa Elokim, Heima v'hamichtav michtav Elokim. Simply understood, v'hamichtav michtav Elokim, that the luchos were written by the Rebbeinu Shalom. Says Rabbi Gutmacher, that's not what that means. V'hamichtav michtav Elokim, if it just meant that the Rebbeinu Shalom wrote the luchos, so then the pasuk just says, v'michtav Elokim heima. What does it mean, v'hamichtav michtav Elokim? And furthermore, he says, was it really Michtav Elokim? Michtav Elokim sounds like it was written on the Luchos Rishonos. But the pasuk goes on to say, Charos ala Luchos. Nothing was written, it was etched into the Luchos. So it seems to be a contradiction within the very pasuk. First it says, Michtav Elokim, sounds like it was written, and then it says, Charos ala Luchos. So of course we normally understand that written doesn't necessarily mean with ink, but he says it's a strange way to say it. If it meant Charos al Luchos, it should have just said that the Rebbeinu Shalom etched it in onto the stone. So what's going on over here? So says Rabbi Gutmacher the following idea. We know that the Gemara tells us in Meseches Megillah, a perplexing Gemara. The Gemara tells us, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah v'itema Reb Chia bar Abba. Man sepach. We know the oisios man sepach. Mem, Nun, Tzadi, Pei, Chaf. Those oisios are unique. Why are those oisios unique? Because they all have enda letters. They have letters which they come up differently. They are written differently when they come at the end of the word, which in and of itself is a question. Why do these 5 letters differ when they come in the middle of the word versus the end of the word? But the Gemara tells us, Man sepach, that these 5 letters have a different surah. And the Gemara says, what does it mean, man sepach? So the Gemara says it stands for man sepach tsoifim omru. The Nevi'im came and were mechadesh these 5 letters. Man sepach tsoifim. Tsoifim refers to the Nevi'im. Those that had vision, they were the ones that were mechadesh these letters. Man sepach came from the Nevi'im, says the Gemara. The Gemara asks the obvious question, that can't be. We know the Nevi'im aren't allowed to be mechadesh anything. Eila hamitzvos she'ein navi rashai lechadesh davar me'ata. It cannot be that the Nevi'im came and gave us new oisiyos, gave us new letters. From the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, we were given a certain aleph beis without matzapach, and the Nevi'im came and were mechadesh new letters matzapach. That's a clear violation of the Eila hamitzvos. It's a clear violation of ein navi rashai lechadesh davar. And furthermore, says Rav Elia Gutmacher, says the Gemara rather. So what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says, furthermore, it can't be. Why? Because after all, we know that on the luchos there were these ender letters. How do we know? The Gemara tells us, Mem v'samach shabeluchos b'neisayu oimdim. So don't tell me the Nevi'im came and were mechadesh these ender letters, the letters that come at the end of a word. It's simply not true. If the Gemara would have just said samach shabeluchos, so then you could say maybe the mem sofis came at the end, came the Nevi'im were mechadesh. But the Gemara says Mem v'samach shabeluchos. Says the Gemara. The Gemara says Mem v'samach shabeluchos b'neisa yo'imdim. So it seems clear that this couldn't have been an enactment of the Nevi'im. It had to be something which was mi Sinai. So says the Gemara, you're right. What does the Gemara tell us? It must be that originally Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the aleph beis as we know it today, with the ender letters, with man tzipach, but we forgot them. We forgot these letters, and therefore the Nevi'im came back and were mechadesh them. Man tzipach tzoifim amrum doesn't mean that the Nevi'im were mechadesh. Ein navi rashai lechadesh davar. What does it mean? It means that we had forgotten them, and the Nevi'im came and taught them to us. Ask Rabbi Elia Gutmacher, how you talking? The Mefarshim asked this by many different halachic areas. Tefillin Debeinu Tam, Tefillin of Rashi. How is it possible that this mechaikas emerged? What the tkiyas, truest tkiyas? We know we have all different shittas. The Gemara says what a true is. So how is that possible? But there are different ways of explaining that. But the oisiyos of aleph beis, we forgot the oisiyos, 5 letters of aleph beis. We just forgot it. Is that really possible? Klal Yisrael forgot 5 letters of the alphabet. Man tzipach, we forgot it and we didn't know about it. And if it's really true that somehow you could say that we forgot it, obviously it means that they weren't in use. You can't forget letters of the alphabet that are in use. It means that for somehow they've fallen out of use. So if they fell out of use, it means they weren't necessary. So what the Nevi'im have the need to come back and remechadish them? This really cuts to the very core of this issue. What are these mantzapach? Why do we have them? Why do we need them? Right? Sometimes the most basic questions we don't ask because we were told by our Rabbi in pre-1A in first grade that these are the 5 letters, mantzapach, and they have to do it, but we don't ask why. No other letter needs it, so why do these letters need it? This is the question of Elia Gutmacher, and he says it's because the question is born out of a misunderstanding. We view Chalil v'chas, but we view sometimes the aleph beis, the letters of aleph beis, the same as the alphabet of A, B, and C, which means basically all that it does, all that it is a sign for what sound to make. But we know the aleph beis is much deeper than that. The aleph beis were the oisiyos shebahem nivra ha'olam. This were the letters that the Rabbeinu Shalom, from a certain perspective, created the world. The Gemara says, Yoideya haya bitzalel itzaref oisiyos shebahem nivra ha'olam. For the Mishkan to be created by Bitzalel, he needed to know how to manipulate the different koichos of every ois, and every ois has a different koyach, as the Gemara in Shabbat tells us. Every ois stands for a different koach in the world. It's not merely just phonetically what sound that letter makes, but the letter actually is mashbiah. It has an effect on the world, and through those hashpahs of the aleph beis, the world was created, and Bitzalel had to know that to create a mini world called the Mishkan. Yodeya haya Bitzalel litzaref oisiyos shebehem nivra ha'olam. Bitzalel had to know how to use, how to manipulate the oisiyos to create the Mishkan. Comes Rabbi Elia Gutmacher and says, so when the world was originally created, the aleph beis reflected the world. Now we know that the world went through a tremendous transformation when Adam Harishon was chote. Right? That's what changed many aspects of the world as we know it, are only a result of the chet of Adam Harishon. For first and foremost, Misa is in the world, the Gemara says, only because of Adam Harishon. Now, when the world is transformed, that the world was created with the Oisiyah Shebehem Nivra Olam. So obviously, when the world goes under a major transformation, together with that, it must reflect itself in the coding that created the world. So when the Rebbeinu Shalom changed the world, he didn't change the world directly. He manipulated the coding of the world, the Oisiyah Shebehem Nivra Ha'olam, and that transformed the world. Rabbi Yikut goes through each of the klalos that results from the chet of Adam Harishon, and he shows how each one of the klalos is hidden in one of the oisiyos of Matzapach. There are 5 main klalos, and those klalos, each one corresponds to one of the oisiyos of Matzapach. The most obvious, of course, is the mem. Mem used to be like an Enderman. Every mem was an Enderman in the Torah, not just at the end of the word, wherever the mem was. Before Chet of Adam Harishon, a mem shebehem nivra olam was what we view as an Enderman. Now, an Enderman is a circle which represents shleimus. It represents completeness. It represents a world of shleimus, a world without misa. The moment the Rebbeinu Shalom introduced Misa into the world, the Rebbeinu Shalom had to change. The Enderman is now no longer a full circle of Shleimus. Now its circle is broken. There's going to be an end to this world. There's going to be Misa that you're going to have to go to the next world, to Olam Haba. And he goes through each one of the Oisiyas, showing what exactly the manipulation in that Ois and how that led to that specific Klala. Mem in general, we know, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, the Talmud of the Goy, right? Beis Medrash Shel HaGoy, Yitzchak Isaac Chaver says, the mem, the end of mem in general, is the sign of Shleimus. It represents the relationship between the Rebbeinu Shalom and Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom, if you were, are half a circle, what we refer to as a nun, and Klal Yisrael is a half a circle, and when we are facing each other like the Kruvim, what's created is a circle, an Enderman. That's why a nun is the worst ice for Klal Yisrael. That's why we don't have it in Ashrei. It stands for Nafilo, because when we're incomplete, when we're not facing the Rebbeinu Shalom, we fall down. That's why Vayehi ben Sayrain is separated from the Torah with 2 backwards nuns, as the Gemara says, because we had turned on the Rebbeinu Shalom. The end of mem is completion, is shleimus. And when there was a world without any misa, it was a world that had an ois of a mem without any break in it. And then Adam Harishon comes in his choyte. Misa is introduced into the world. All the 5 klolos are introduced to the world, and that has to reflect itself in 5 oisios, which now change. Man sepach, whether it has to do with the nun, which is now an ois of nefila, whether it has to do with a chof, which is now again kappa parsela ani. Now people are going to have to go on and get money from other people. There's an ol haparnasa. Each one of the oisiyos is now changed because of the chet of Adam Harishon, those 5 oisiyos. And therefore, says Rabbi Yikut, we stopped using the oisiyos of Mansapach. They weren't necessary anymore. We were no longer using them. They weren't relevant to our world. And therefore, shakchum, we forgot them. Comes Moshe Rabbeinu at Matan Torah, and Matan Torah sets the clock back to Koydem Chet of Adam Harishon. And now, once again, the world is going to be the way the world is supposed to be, without any Misa, without any Tzarais. That's what's going to be Achar Matan Torah, Paska Zumasan. And once again, we are going to replace the Mansepach with the real Mansepach, with the real Oisius, the way it should have been Koydem Chet of Adam Harishon. And then comes the Chet of Egel, Chet HaEgel. And what does the Gemara say? Parcha oisiyos be'avir. We're no longer zoicha to these oisiyos. What does it mean, parcha oisiyos be'avir? Because these oisiyos, the way that the luchos originally were written, was with the end of letters. Not just at the end of the letter, but we were going back to the way it was supposed to be. Now the alphabet was going to be different. All there, even when you wrote a mem in the middle of a letter, when you wrote a tzadi in the middle of the letter, it was going to be in the form of an end of letter, because now we're pre-chet of Adam Harishon. There's no more Misa, there's no more Klolos, there's no more Tzaras. Moshe Rabbeinu sees the Chet HaEgel, Parchas, Oisiyos Ba'avir. He realizes now we're going back to post-Chet Adam Harishon. And Klal Yisrael once again goes back, resorts to the regular Oisiyos that we are used to. And not only do they not have the end of Oisiyos, they don't even use them at the end of the letter. They're no more needed. No one's using them, and therefore, shakchum. We forgot them. He asked, how could we forget them? We forgot them because we didn't use them anymore, because they weren't relevant to us anymore. And then the Nevi'im came. And the Nevi'im were misnabe. They told us about terrible tkufos that were coming. And they told us about terrible golos that was coming. But they wanted to give chizuk to Klal Yisrael. So how did they give chizuk to Klal Yisrael? By saying, even though we're going through terrible tkufos, there will be a time, l'keitz hayamin, where once again we get the end of letters back. Basically, what do I care about the end of letters? Because that reflects a world of shleimus. There will once again be a world of shleimus. We're not there yet. So the Nevi'im were misakein. We're not going to put them in the middle of a word, because that would reflect a world that we're not experiencing. We're going to put it at the end of the world to tell Klal Yisrael that in fact such a world is coming. It's not here, it's at the end. You have something to look forward to. With one exception, Rabbi said. There's one exception where we have an end of letter in the middle of a word. The pasuk says in Yeshayahu, it's in the Haftorah Parshas Yisro. The pasuk says in Yeshayahu, "Lemarbe hamisro leshalom ein kate." What's going on over there in that pasuk? That pasuk, Yeshayahu Navi just told Klal Yisrael terrible, terrible things that are happening to Klal Yisrael. The darkness of war is looming over them. But then Yeshayahu Navi says there's going to be someone named Chizkiah Melech, a person who at this point in time was destined to be the Mashiach, destined to bring in usher in a world of la'asid lavoy until he fails in a certain area. So Yeshayahu Navi is telling Klal Yisrael there's going to be a time of Melech HaMashiach, which is going to usher in a world that was pre-Chet Adam Harishon, pre-Chet HaEgel, Lemarbe HaMisra. And that pasuk, Lemarbe HaMisra, the mem is an enderman in the middle of a letter. Why? Because it's talking about the time of la'aseh lava. And la'aseh lava, we're only going to be using those oisios. We're only going to be using those oisios not only at the end of the word, but even in the middle of the word. Because that will be a world of shleimus, a world without misa. And therefore we choose the mem, says Yeshayahu Navi. There's going to be dark times ahead, but there will also be a time of Mashiach. And that Mashiach will usher in a world of Lemarba Misra, where we'll have even the Endi Osios in the middle of the world. Because we'll know a world of Shleimus. Says Rav Yegutmacher, this is what the Torah means. When the Torah says that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Moshe Rabbeinu on the second Luchos, Moshe Rabbeinu on the second Luchos wrote that which was on the first Luchos. Says Rav Yegutmacher, the pasuk is very, very particular. The pasuk says Kadvarim v'kasavti ala Luchos as Hadevarim. It doesn't say that it was Michtav Elokim. Michtav Elokim means the script of the Rebbeinu Shalom. You know what the script of the Rebbeinu Shalom is? It means it's not referring to the hand of the Rebbeinu Shalom. It was Charas ala Luchos. There was no Michtav. Michtav means the font. The Rebbeinu Shalom used oisiyos that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't use, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu says, "V'chasavti ala luchos es hadvarim." I didn't write it the way the Rebbeinu Shalom wrote it. Rebbeinu Shalom wrote it with mantzafach. I wrote the content as hadvarim. The content that the Rebbeinu Shalom wrote, I put on the second luchos, but I had to do it in a different font because now we reverted back to we reverted back to post Chet Adam Harishon. And therefore I can no longer use these oisios. We're going to have to wait Lemarbe HaMisra to the time of Chizkiah Melech, or perhaps even further, the time of Melech HaMashiach, when the world reflects a world of shleimus, the world reflects a world without misa. Then we could use those oisios. We could use them not only at the end of the word, we could use them even in the middle of the word. But until then, the Nevi'im came back and were mechadish for us. we'll be able to use them at the end of the word to give us hope, to understand that even though right now we're living in a time where the mem is not shalem and the nun is kofuf, but there will be a time at the end of the word, at the end of the time, we'll be able to experience a world, Bishlei Musa, a world the likes of which was created, Koidem Chet Adam Harisha.